You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. My name is Doug Thorpe, and today we are going to talk about our favorite topic, leadership. Specifically, we're going to lean into the arena talking about leadership in education, higher education, learning of all kinds. But I've got a feeling my guest and I are going to have some fun jousting around about just leadership in general and the principles and theories behind it. Speaking of my guest, his name is Dr. Toby Travis. Toby, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Doug. Great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. And tell us where you're calling from.
Currently, Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I'm head of school.
Head of school, yeah. So talk a little bit, and then I know we'll get into a little more detail. Just give everybody a flavor of the kind of school and the span and the grade levels that are involved.
Well, currently I'm superintendent of Village Christian Academy. We've got preschool through 12, about 690 kids total. College preparatory program here and serving families throughout the Fayetteville area. This is also a military town, so we've got a lot of military families. My background, however, has also been in international schools, bilingual schools. My wife and I lived in Ecuador for about 10 years and served in 2 different schools there. So, my background as in school leadership has been exclusively in the private sector, but have done a lot of work and training also for public school educators. Did some extensive work with the University of Pennsylvania a couple of years ago with training public school administrators and supervisors, and so have a lot of connection and friendships working in the public sector as well. But my work as a school administrator has been committed to the private sector.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you've been an educator most of your adult life. Is that true? Is that a fair statement?
Actually, transitional. I've always had a passion for education. I've always had a foot in the door, as it were, but actually had an entrepreneurial background as a young man. I actually had a show business career for a number of years and produced a show that toured, started a small business. And so I have, a business background as well, worked in the nonprofit sector as well, and helped develop an organization that ended up having work and reach internationally. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but always a touch and passion for education. That was always kind of I knew if my itinerant work, I was on the road for many years, Doug, so literally globetrotting for about 20 years. And the thought was, if I ever got tired of that, I'd settle down and work, in a school setting, which is exactly what I ended up doing. So about the last 15 years, though, have been dedicated to K-12 schools predominantly. And some of those years in the classroom, but then the majority has been at the admin level.
At the risk of sounding facetious, I'm going to coin the phrase that is typically held out for our military folks. Thank you for your service. And I say that with an honest degree of passion. I've got children and spouses of theirs in my family that are educators. And that is tough duty, and it's an important component, I think, in the fabric of our country and where we might be going as a society. And I say, God love all the teachers and administrators and the things you have to deal with nowadays.
Yeah, underappreciated, undercompensated, and yet critical to the very fabric of our communities.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Well, I'm going to kind of lean into our thought process here today. I want to ask first this notion of leadership in education. When did you first start zeroing in on the idea that there's something about educators needing a leadership toolkit on top of everything else they're doing?
Yeah, great question. So really, I think back to my first formal classroom experience, or as a teacher in the classroom, and came into that school, and I think I was a bit naive. I just kind of assumed we'd all get along. I mean, it's all about the kids and meeting the kids' needs. And I saw and realized very, very quickly, these relationships aren't necessarily healthy between admin and the faculty. And within a very short amount of time, Doug, I had the opportunity to join the admin. I got tagged fairly early on in my teaching career to pursue administration. And I'm like, whoa, we've got to start getting really intentional about fixing these relationships. Now, and I had been through kind of similar work in the corporate setting, and had seen how we've got to be intentional, and it's vital that we have high levels of trust between leadership and employees, and in this case school admin and faculty. And a good friend of mine, David Horsager, wrote a bestseller called the Trust Edge. You may be familiar with that book. It actually went #1, I think, on Wall Street Journal a number of years ago. And I remember reaching out to Dave saying, hey, my trust expert, what counsel can you give us? And he actually came and spent time on our campus working with our team. It was phenomenal. I mean, just one of the best professional development sessions I've ever been a part of. In fact, it's very rare that you have a PD session in a school setting that ends with a standing ovation, and he's a great speaker and trainer as well. But that really piqued my interest. And actually, Dave was a great help to me then as I was going into my doctoral program, just with identifying much of the research that's been done that's out there on leadership. And of course, I was looking for then, well, what does this look like in a school setting? I'd had the opportunity through that friendship to actually sit in a corporate training where, you've got folks from FedEx and Goodyear and United Health Services, and I was sitting there from Alliance Academy, and but had through that wonderful opportunity to see, okay, what do corporate leaders do in training and ensuring that there are high levels of trust in their organizations. I'm like, schools need this, but schools do have a unique structure. They have a unique jargon. And so that's really been kind of my work and focus for the last umpteen years now, has really been, okay, what does trust research inform us about schools and how they function better? And if I can kind of jump to it, Doug, I mean, the bottom line of the research and all the work comes down to really this one stat. The #1 indicator of successful schools is trusted leadership. #1 indicator of successful schools is trusted leadership. And there's boatloads of research behind that. What's really gets fascinating, though, is it doesn't seem to matter how we define the term success. That finding still holds true. So if we define success as student achievement levels, when you look at schools where we have the highest levels of student achievement, what you will also find is a direct correlation to high levels of trusted leadership. If we define success as retention of quality faculty and staff, same thing, direct correlation to high levels of trusted leadership. There were several studies on discretionary energy. So basically, where do people volunteer more? Where do they give of themselves above and beyond? Schools where there's high levels of trusted leadership. Innovation, creativity, direct connections to leadership. And you've seen it, I'm sure, in the corporate sector as well. These are not unique stats to education, but we do find them holding true in education. So when we don't get this right, this is also where we run into all kinds of problems and dysfunctionality. And so all that to answer your question, where did I see it? Yeah, right from the get-go in my formal education career. I had been an itinerant trainer. I had been on literally hundreds, if not thousands, of school campuses in the years prior to stepping into the classroom. So I had seen it kind of at a distance, but then right up close to my day-to-day work, I was seeing it. And then had the opportunity of working with an amazing and wonderful team to see a really, really significant turnaround when we were intentional about addressing those issues.
That whole idea of trust is so big, and I too am a fan and of David's work, the Trust Edge, and he frequently goes to around the country to education teams, either public school districts or the private schools, conferences, continuing education venues, things like that. And in fact, it was ironic. Pre well, let's see, I guess it was last spring. My daughter, who is a high school math teacher, went to one such conference, and David was speaking there. And she straddled up to in line and said, "My dad's an executive coach. You know, you might know him," and dropped my name. And he goes, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do." And we and she was kind of surprised. But David and I, and he's done a lot of work on it, as have I. Mine's not probably as distributed widely as his is, but I am too a big fan of talking about that creation of trust in the workplace. And a colleague of mine and I, in fact, the last book I wrote was partnered with my friend Roger Ferguson, and we talk about building trust at work. And it's a model we've used for decades. And it was ratified when Google did their big study and published their Project Aristotle, they called it. Came out in 2018. It's hard to believe it's already 4 years old.
Yeah.
But it was the culmination of their 2-year internal study on why some teams perform better than others. It wasn't making logical sense to them why, for the high horsepower that they recruit and hire, why all teams just didn't perform at peak. And they dug into it and conducted this 2-year study. And of course, the compelling runaway contributing factor to high performance was high trust, and they coined what is now the popular buzzword psychological safety.
Yes, right.
And put that out there, and if it existed before, they made it famous by citing it in their studies. So it is.
Well, and I'm sure you're familiar with Edelman and the work that they have done for years and years. Their annual barometer that they put out, and it's huge and it's extensive, and it's across sectors. I mean, that's the thing, is this is not a unique application to, oh, this is really important for, the medical sector. No, it is universal. But the application to the very specific nuts and bolts of what you do with it and how you do this intentionally, it does take nuancing to the industry. And again, this is what I've attempted to add to the conversation is, okay, in a school setting, how do we assess it? How do we intentionally build it? How do we tie this to other research that we find about high performing schools? And we've got some great studies that have come out of, like, the Marzano group and some others that have shown us very specific skill sets and behaviors. Well, then we need to look at, well, which of those are connected to supporting high levels of trust. And so then when we're assessing a trust level and identifying, okay, that's weak in this certain area, in my book, I talk about these 6 components of trusted leadership, and we assess those components. Well, when a component is low and it needs to be reinforced, what are the specific things we need to be doing? Well, we now know within the educational sector, no, I can tell you exactly what you need to be working on. That will also have a direct correlation to, again, student achievement levels, teacher retention, et cetera. And that's where this actually gets kind of exciting, and where the fun work is in the action planning of, okay, how do we make a difference? We've got all this information, we got all this research that tells us this is the thing we've got to get right. And what's really fun, Doug, is when we get it right, it's almost like magic. All kinds of other good things just start happening. And that's probably been the greatest joy that I've found out of kind of my side hustle as a consultant, and also in the work of leading my own schools, is, boy, when we get this right, you start seeing all kinds of really, really wonderful things start happening in the school and in the organization.
I think it's interesting to again bring in David's work in his book Trust Edge. There's one segment in that book, as I recall it, as he was trying to build the case for why leaders in the business world should be thinking about trust. He does cite the studies that have been done that says school-aged children perform better when they feel
Yeah.
that they're in a trust
Right.
environment. So if the administration and the teachers have created that trust environment, the students perform better. So I think it's ironic here. We're doing kind of this full circle on the idea that and correct me if you saw David's book differently, but the way I read it, he was making the case for business guys to pay attention to this notion of trust. He pointed to the fact that most rudimentary kids in school do better when there's a trust environment that has been created. And I'll connect your word you used a moment ago, that discretionary effort or discretionary contribution of time and effort. That's a word in my book too that we talk about. We talk about the idea of how does a leader help create the desire to contribute discretionary effort from the work team. It's by building the trust in the environment so that they choose to contribute more. And everybody has that capacity in one way or another. Nobody operates at full speed, full high gear all the time. So you do have choices you make in how you commit your time and intellect and resources. So as a leader, being able to tap into that is so vitally important.
Right. And really, the teacher is the leader in the classroom. So it has direct application. And it's what's been interesting. You see all kinds of social media posts about it, and it's been true for years. And you'll hear a lot of people quote the research around what's the number one factor that impacts student success. And they'll say the teacher, which is true, but you're going to drill down. Specifically, it's about the teacher is just what you said. It's a high level of trust. That's the factor that makes all the difference in student engagement. And when we look at, well, what is it that drives high level of student achievement? It's internal motivation. What drives high levels of internal motivation of a student and engagement in the classroom? Trusted relationship with a teacher. It's and then you've got to back it up even further. Well, what then drives high levels of motivation and engagement of teachers? Because that's what you've got to have. It's all about trusted leadership. So are they well supported? Do they have a trusting relationship? So again, there's this direct line that goes back to school leadership. If that's not in place, another stat, Doug, that they talk about a lot with school leaders, and it's also true in the business sector. What percentage of school initiatives, improvement initiatives, fail? And the answer is 70%. And that stat has held true for years. But take a look at entrepreneur stats. What percentage of new businesses fail? 70%. What percentage of business new initiatives fail? 70. It's the same number over and over and over. And then you start digging, well, why? Why is this vast majority of improvement initiatives failing or launches failing? Well, then what the literature is showing us, it's all about basically execution. And then you dig in a little bit deeper. Okay, what is it about the execution? It's leadership. It all, Maxwell, it all rises and falls, and it's true. So when I look at schools, that 30% that know they're rolling out these improvement initiatives and they're succeeding and they're moving. Well, it doesn't take long to figure out the reason they're working is because they've already built high levels of trust between the administration and the faculty. The admin owns the change. They're driving it. We could talk about change management strategies, right? It's all infused together. And so what schools often miss is they're so anxious to fix, some learning deficiency, or they're trying to fix, whatever the latest strategy is in instruction or assessment. If they don't take time to first make sure there's high levels of trust between leadership and the faculty, it doesn't matter what the initiative is. It's not going to last. And this is the common complaint you hear from teachers all the time is, oh, we're always trying something new. We're always doing something new. Yeah, you are. And it's failing because you're not taking time to fix the core element here. And that is you've got a positive working environment in which teachers feel well supported, trusted by their administrators, and vice versa. Do that work, and then almost any initiative you want to dive into, it's going to succeed.
I like it, Toby. I tell you what, I'm watching the clock here, and as I feared, this time is burning away so fast as we get into this. And I think it's a great discussion. We're going to have to take a commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a lot more about this notion of the elements of leadership that can be adapted and adopted to help achieve these things. So hang with us. We'll be right back.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
Hello again, everyone. We're back. This is Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm Doug Thorpe, and I'm visiting with Dr. Toby Travis. Dr. Travis is an education administrator. I started to say elementary. No, you got it all going on. And we've been talking about the applications of values of leadership and how you build that trust environment in your team setting for your organization. And when we were in the green room teeing up for this show, we touched on the idea I had thrown out there, what I guess might be considered urban lore, but it has proven time and time again. You take the top of the pile of industrial CEOs and they move around. Tom Cook came from, I believe it was Pepsi to go to Apple, and Carol, boy, I just drew a blank. She's the current chairman of UPS, came over from Home Depot. And so these folks move around. So it quickly demonstrates the idea that their value is not in the technical expertise they've got for the product line or the function that's being performed, but theirs is a honed and developed skill for leading and executing on work. So, Toby, you had some thoughts about that statement and clarify, clean us up, if you will.
Yeah, I would agree, but with a kind of a qualified agreement with that. And we talked earlier, yeah, we can pick a little bit of a fight maybe here, but not really. I think you're going to agree in the end as well. What you will also find with those leaders who are transferring or attempting to transfer, and do often successfully transfer those leadership skills to a sector that they do not have previous experience in, it can be successful so long as they're willing and motivated to dive in to learn the business.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of something that happened a number of years ago. So we've been in a teacher and administrator shortage of education for years in the U.S. It's gotten a lot of press because the pandemic has just worsened it. But we've been graduating fewer and fewer teachers and certainly school administrators for years. Our college programs are not cranking them out. In fact, when I do trainings of school administrators, as kind of a little survey, I do a pop survey. I'll say, how many of you here in this room, your plan in undergrad or graduate work was to be a school administrator? Doug, nobody raises their hand. Nobody planned to be here. Now we end up here because we all have, passion for education. But my point is, a number of years ago, there was a movement to let's just go look for good managers, and we'll get them in and we'll make them high school and elementary principals. We'll make them heads of schools and superintendents. If they got good quality management skills in corporate industry, that's transferable, right? It's the same skills. And what we found is the only ones who were successful were the ones who went back to school and learned the nuts and bolts of our industry. And that really was kind of my own story. I mean, I'm a kind of a second career school administrator. I literally went back to school to learn the ins and outs of quality instruction, assessment, curriculum, learning environments, and what you can't lead without knowledge of the industry. Are the leadership skills transferable? Absolutely, but you've got to know your stuff. One of the things we know about trusted leaders is they are competent in their knowledge, right? They they have an ability to articulate whatever the language is of the industry they're leading. So yes, the leadership skills are transferable, but those leaders who are successful, they take time to learn their industry. And so in the education sector, right, can someone segue over to educational leadership from whatever corporate setting or nonprofit setting? Sure. But you've got to take time to also make sure you know what quality instruction looks like. You know what authentic assessments look like, because you're trying to lead teachers in doing that work. And if you can't speak their language and if you can't understand their issues, no, I'm sorry, you're not going to build trust. You're not going to be credible.
That's a fair distinction, and you are correct in your prediction. I don't disagree with that. The thought that comes to my mind is there's a lot of anecdotal legend and story about some of the biggest leaders and innovators in the world right now are voracious readers.
Yeah,
so
right.
There's constant consumption of information to distill and process. And word is that as Elon Musk got into the space program, the engineers who came to work there were amazed at how on Monday he would walk by your station and have a discussion and be obviously naive and ill-informed about the task, but by Friday he could talk the business with.
Yeah, right. Well, we found, trusted leaders are leaders who have opinions. They've done their reading and they have formulated convictions. One of the things that I talk about, I use this bridge analogy in the book, where I talk about the foundation of trust is all values and beliefs. Do we know what we know about our industry, and do we have beliefs and values that we not only articulate, but then we consistently make sure are aligned to everything that we're doing? This is how trust is built. So yes, again, the leadership skill is transferable, but part of the work is being confident in whatever the industry is that you're leading.
It's interesting that just in that one statement you made, there's so many things that cross my mind from my own experience working with business owners and corporate leaders. I'll talk about some of the corporate population first, those that have risen up the ranks and they're in the upper middle, I'll call them. They're not C-suite yet, but they might even be designated on the short list to go there. So they're still kind of honing some of that executive presence and ability. Often I'll ask them, especially if I'm told they've just moved into a new role and they've got a new team that's come together, or maybe they inherited an old team and they're working that. I'll ask them, what's your vision for your unit right now? And they'll often it'll be a blank stare. It's like, well, I'm waiting for direction from above. And I'm going, oh, wrong answer, wrong answer. And I challenge them on taking what they do know about where they are, and I'll give them, grace that there's probably a lot to still learn and absorb. But for what you do know about the unit, have you not yet painted your own vision picture of where you want it to go? And that is incumbent on you. That is not an option. You have to do that work.
Yeah. Well, this is also why I'm partly a bit of a data hound. I love data-informed planning and goal setting. So we're always doing assessments on our trust. So how is our trust level doing? And using the data and how does that get better? And what are the specific actions that we can engage in to move the needle, as it were, and then reassess and readjust and set a new goal. Big fan of SMART goals, that we're being specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. And, one of the things, I get back to Horsager's work, Dave talks about the 90-day quick plan, it's his, and we've adapted that. Most of in my leadership teams in schools, we usually think semester based. So it's like, okay, sure, what can we accomplish in the next semester? And that's not to say there isn't a plan, especially at the board level, to be thinking, long-term strategic planning where you're creating, multi-year plans. But to drive improvement, which is really what we're all after, is how do we keep getting better at whatever it is we're doing? Oh yeah, the short action plans. How can we move the needle in the next few months? What's that going to look like? And how are we going to know we did it? Really, really important.
Well, on that note, you spoke my magic word in the first half of the show, your word intentional. That, as a lot of my readers and listeners know, that's one of my favorite words to encourage leaders. You must be intentional about what you're endeavoring to do. And part of that is whether you call it a 90-day or a 100-day plan. I have a 100-day plan model that I work with my clients on to try to map out that level of intentionality to make every day matter some way, somehow. Some little incremental nudge toward the goal is what every day has to be about, because time is the commodity we all share. And the way we use that is the ultimate. I mean, people get hung up on budgets and dollars and capex and all of that. But I would argue that even somebody that is more effective at planning and spending their time is probably going to outpace the guy that's really good with a budget.
Yeah, exactly. And usually it comes down to how they do their work. For example, one of the practices or norms that my teams have followed is we will not use email or text to solve a problem.
Okay.
And now you can make somebody aware of a problem, although we will often say, if you've got a complaint, if you're upset, you may not use email or text. We're going to get face to face, or at least phone to phone. And because what I've found over the years is by trying to solve an issue or even to launch a grievance via email or text, it's really not helping anybody or anything. And often will fuel just a waste of energy and emotion. But if we will commit ourselves to no, we're not going to get sucked into the social media trap or the texting trap. No, to be able to solve a problem, to deal with an issue, we got to do this face to face, and we're going to respect each other and dive in and have the hard conversations. But what I was just trying to illustrate there is it's usually the difference between success and the lack of success is having intentional positive culture, and that's through the norms of how we do life together. So again, how are we going to manage email? How are we going to manage our meetings? Usually at the beginning of the year, I'll ask my faculty, I'll have them pull out a card or a little list, and I'll say, okay, write down all the things you hate about staff meetings. Just tell me everything you hate about a staff meeting. And it's usually, they run long, we get off to topic. It's okay, flip those statements and turn those into norms of what you would like to see us do. And out of that, we'll create 4 or 5 norms of what staff meetings will look like during that year. Thus, we will always start on time and end on time. We will always only talk about what's on the agenda. We will always speak in a positive and helpful tone. Those types of norms. And it's all about creating culture. If you can create a place where people love to come to work, it's amazing how the work gets better.
Yeah, that's very close to the teaching that comes out of Patrick Lencioni's work on high-performing teams. He's, of course, the big advocate for creating a team charter and a team contract. And I've done some of that work at the team level, gone into an organization where the team, wants to step up and go to another level. And that whole, and you can call it whatever word you want to, charter, contract, covenant, a lot of that's not worth getting hung up on the semantics, but it's the principle behind it. And that is having that discussion, as you pointed out, what are the norms? What are the things? And a quick story, I was working with one large team at a big global brand, and about 14 members on this team, and the team leader was a pretty dynamic guy. And he introduced me, he said, I've asked Doug here to help us facilitate. We're going to write a team charter and a team contract, and we're going to kind of revisit and reset the table for who we are and how we want to do our work. And so I was giving them some examples of what they could consider, and we were just getting to your note card part. And one of the guys sat back in his chair and folded his arms and said, we don't need to do that. We know each other. We know how everybody operates. And the lady sitting next to him, who was a peer, looked at him and said, Bill, we really don't. I'm sorry, I disagree with you. We don't know each other that well. And I think it would be valuable to us to do this exercise and lay these things out. And as we got into it about an hour later, it was real subtle, but I watched him lean over and I overheard him say, I apologize. You are spot on. I'm learning so much today. So, there was already a level of trust. To go back to our word, there was already a level of trust between the two of them. They were pretty bold at speaking their truth and not having either one particularly offended. But there's power in being able to lay those things out. And it sounds, on one hand, we're all adults, we're all well educated, we're all experienced. Why isn't this second nature? Well, it's not. It's just not.
It's not. And we really do need accountability with each other. Once we have those agreed norms or whatever, in a contract or whatever verbiage we're going to use, then it is mutually agreeing that, hey, we're going to hold each other accountable to this, because we'll all blow it. We'll all make mistakes and fall short from time to time. But, culture comes through shared community. I mean, it's shared commitments. It's in shared values. That's why, again, the beliefs and values are the foundation of trust. And if those are shared and consistently practiced, in fact, the research has shown that where trust breaks down the most is when a leader has articulated a belief or a value, but then has not consistently carried that out in their practice, protocols, or policies or procedures. Sorry for the alliteration, but this is where trust breaks down the most. What I call the substructure of trust is all about connecting and supporting everything that we do to our beliefs and values. And this is where it really becomes authentic, and it's also where it most frequently falls apart.
I worked with a company once who was making an earnest effort to try to revamp and modernize their culture. And one of the drivers was the recognition that in order to attract, retain, and engage modern workforce, they had to change the culture they had, because it was a legacy of heavy-handed command and control and all those old school thinkings. And so they did all this work, and everybody, it was a couple years in the making, and everybody kind of drank the Kool-Aid and got on it. And as an example, one of the elements, they wanted to be more nimble in the way they conducted their business. They had a legacy of, if a market opportunity opened up, they would exhaustively research it before they made a go, no go decision. And I mean, you could call it the 100% effort to get all the data, all the facts, all the issues. Well, guess what? 90% of the time, the opportunity was long gone by the time they accumulated all that. They could have made a valid, informed decision at a 70% mark of content. It was that extra 30% of effort that took so long, it was heavy lifting and hard to do. So they changed the culture. They said, we're doing away with that 100% mindset. We're going to go with 70. It's truly okay to do that. And they had a lot of tenured employees that said, I used to get in trouble for doing that. I really don't know that I trust you yet, that this is a real deal. And managers had to work really hard at saying, it's real, it's real, it's real. Well, 364 days it was real. You know what happened on the 365th day? The execution of the traditional annual forced ranking assessment of all employees. And you know what forced ranking means?
Yes.
I've got 10 people, somebody's number 1, somebody's number 10, and 10's not good. And everybody else is in between. Nobody gets to share a slot. And some of what ended up getting cited for why somebody was designated an 8, 9, or 10 versus a 1, 2, or 3 was you didn't do the 100% work. The project you did, you only went 70. And they said, that's what you told us to do.
Yeah, right.
So 364 days of very heavy effort went totally out the window. In effectively one day. I'm being a little literal, but
exactly. When the pieces of the bridge are not connected to the foundation, it's going to collapse. Yeah.
I want to try to wrap up with one question that's kind of burning in my mind, Toby. Sometimes when you get into a discussion and you want to talk about leadership, one of the first things someone who maybe has not tried to study it or begin a journey toward better leadership, you start with some definitions. They say, what is leadership? What does it involve? And what is it about? And everything. And what I tell people is you are correct on that point. You could go to Amazon and there's hundreds of thousands of books about leadership, and everybody that's written one, I'm guilty, I've written 2 or 3 of them myself, try to frame a definition that's workable. What I encourage people to do is begin thinking about their own experience of working with an effective leader.
Yeah.
And make your own list of attributes that resonate with you and can easily align with your values, your motives, your beliefs, and begin building your own framework of leadership. And then you can go study. I mean, people will come in with things like, okay, yeah, I need to communicate better. I need to learn how to delegate. I need to learn how to mentor. I need to learn how to coach. And all those things start bolting on. That's a long lead in to ask you, do you have such a definition of what a good administrator leader in the education world looks like?
Well, I'm a big fan, and I will suspect you probably are as well, of Jim Collins, and his classic Good to Great still holds true in really every setting. And you go through those. He has 5 levels of leadership, and of course there are markers at each level. But as you get to that top level, his level 5, the 2 primary indicators are passion about the mission and humility. You look at those 2 elements. So what makes the best leaders is they really believe in what they're doing. There is a passion, there's a fire burning in them for whatever the organization is about. But there's also matched with that servant leader mindset, of hey, it's not about me. It's about us and what we're doing together. How can I make you successful? One of the exercise that I will frequently do with boards and board training is I'll ask them to bring their org chart, and we'll literally turn it upside down. Because frequently in the classic school org chart and any business, usually, you'll have, at the top, you'll have the board of directors or the owners, and then you've got a CEO or a superintendent, and then you've got principals, and then underneath that, you got teachers and coordinators, and literally, we need to change our paradigm and flip this, that no, the board should be our rock. They should be our terra firma. And really the role of the CEO or the superintendent is support. I'm support personnel to ensure that my principals are wildly successful, and their job is to make sure that their teachers are wildly successful. These are support roles. So yes, we're leaders, but we need to be focused, passionate about what we're doing here together, and then humbly realize it's all about making sure other people are successful. Because when we pour ourselves into their success, obviously we become successful.
So one last quick question, and then we'll wrap it up here. Classic debate. I've known of it for decades, since I took my first business class in school. Are leaders born or bred?
Yeah, both. Yeah, both is the quick answer. There are some that, they are. And when you said they're born, it really means the environment in which they grew up in prepared and developed within them skill sets that were either modeled through a parent or a mentor or a grandparent. I mean, we usually always become the people we hang around, right? Yeah. It's that kind of classic principle. So really, when we say we're born, we're really talking about an environment that we grew up in. And but I also have seen people who have grown up in maybe even toxic environments turn into really powerful leaders. Because they choose to do so, and they choose to make the adaptations to their behavior and their mindset, and so both would be my answer.
Good. And that one, that last example you gave, it may well be motivated by a desire to do a 180 from where they came.
Right.
And so they're seeking the greater good on whatever that 180 looks like. So,
exactly.
Well, Toby, thank you so much. You do have a book that we're going to reference in the show notes, but if somebody's interested in reaching out or just researching more, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's usually the fastest and quickest way, just Dr. Toby Travis, and we can connect on LinkedIn. The book is Trust Ed, The Bridge to School Improvement, available on Amazon. And if you just Google my name, you're going to find me. And we'll connect.
Very good. Well, as I said, folks, we're going to have all that great information in the show notes here. So one last time, Toby, thank you so much. This has been really helpful and a good discussion.
Doug, thank you for the opportunity, and best to you in your work.
Appreciate it. Folks, this is a place in the show. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this episode on your favorite streaming channel, that we are available on video over at YouTube, a channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I also want to put a plug in for my friends and colleagues at the IBGR radio network. That's ibgr.network online, and that is a syndicated broadcast network that I have the privilege of being a part of. The show appears there on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are broadcast globally in 185 countries, so tell your friends that may be hungry for something like this. IBGR is a business-only network. There's biz talk all day long, every day, and a lot of great powerful information over there. So hop in and check that out. Speaking back to YouTube, I would encourage you to hop over there, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment, leave me a note. I'd love getting feedback from everybody so that I'm got new ideas for topics and ideas that we can get into. And if you are or know someone who would be a great guest on the show, let me know that too. I'm always open and would welcome that. So thank you for listening in. We're going to sign off, say goodbye for now. Take care.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.